How's everyone doing? Good? Good? See some nods. Everybody close your eyes. All of you. Don't fall asleep. I know it's early in the morning. Just let me your imagination for a couple seconds. I want you to envision a criminal. Somebody who you wouldn't want to run into in a secluded alleyway, dark at night. What does this dark figure look like? What's he wearing? What are his mannerisms? How's he talking to you? Is he talking in slang? Maybe he's pointing a gun at you. Maybe it's cocked, slanted. You can open your eyes now. Make sure you keep that image in your mind. Did anybody notice the descriptions that I'd used? Dark figure, he. For a lot of you, those descriptions might have gone unnoticed, and I find that quite interesting because I asked you to conceptualize an image in your mind of a generic criminal, yet your mind was quick to adapt to the idea that it was somebody dark and somebody male. I believe that this phenomenon is because the modern American image of a criminal has evolved to become an African American male. Bias is something that's taught, and I believe that the American people have been taught to identify blackness with criminality because this association is advantageous to those who have created it. Although the 13th Amendment is primarily known for having brought about the legal emancipation of African American slaves in America, there exists a loophole which permits the practice of slavery in that it is a case of that it is a punishment for crime for those who have been duly convicted. To recuperate for the loss of their slave workforce, Southerners during the Reconstruction period began to recapture black men by labeling them as criminal. Arrests were made on minor infractions such as littering or loitering. Now, this wasn't necessarily a matter of racism at the time, but more one of pragmatism. Now that slavery was illegal, there was a huge gap in the Southern workforce. And the easiest way to refill those ranks was by identifying the black man as criminal. And under that facade of criminality, things kind of just remained the same. You see, people like when things are the same. And this isn't necessarily an attack on their morality. It's just that people enjoy normality and they enjoy stability. They like knowing what's going to happen because it's always happened that way. They like having this idea that they're in control of their lives. And this is also why presidential slogans during the time, like President Warren G. Harding's "Return to Normalcy," struck with voters. And normalcy from that time and all the way to the civil rights movement of the 1960s had a very specific hierarchy of white over black. Now, this hierarchy had always existed, but as time went by and more people began to challenge it, they needed to find new reasons to justify maintaining something like this. So, how do you justify determining your worth as more than someone else's? You undermine their credibility as a worthwhile person. And the easiest way to do this is to associate them with something that's unequivocally malicious. In this case, as criminal. Racism gained its justification from the idea that its victims were criminal, and this deliberately written narrative became the driving force for segregation. Deemed one of the most influential cinematic productions in all of American history, D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation portrayed black people as animals who lacked basic human decency and were prone to criminal activity. We can almost immediately see the after effects as it almost single-handedly spawned the rebirth of the Ku Klux Klan in American politics. Government officials began to openly embrace allegiance with the Klan because they were this distorted symbol of power and justice against the forces of criminality, which were suddenly synonymous with the black population. In fact, this vilification was so apparent that prominent change was considered near impossible until the civil rights movement of the 60s, during which the use of civil disobedience made it extremely difficult to portray activists as anything but innocuous. I mean, how would you rationalize beating a non-resistant civilized person, right? Thanks to these changes brought by the civil rights movement, by the time the 70s and 80s came around, explicit racism was no longer deemed politically correct. But to believe that the legal changes brought by the civil rights movement of the 60s would suddenly instill some magical change of heart and bridge the rift between white and black America would be, at best, quixotic. Politicians began to exploit the hatred and fear of Americans as a means to gaining new voter demographics. Throughout this era, we see a migration of Southern Democrats into the Republican Party, primarily due to something that has now become known as the Southern strategy. Nixon's administration is predominantly known for using this strategy. They use crime as a way to redirect attention from the diminished popularity of their own administration, primarily due to it being in the wake of the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War. This is John Ehrlichman, one of Nixon's campaign advisors regarding this very strategy. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies: the anti-war left and black people. By getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. This concept of a black criminal has always been a scapegoat, a distractor. And from then on, the rest is pretty much history. War on crime evolved into a war on drugs that dominated public policy throughout the 80s and 90s as the public pushed for legislation that militarized police, skyrocketed incarceration rates, and economized a prison industry. Under the media, we see a mirror between the birth of a nation in the 1980s and 1990s as the black population adopted new names like super predator that once again depicted them as animals, lacked basic human decency, and were prone to criminal activity. A lie repeated often enough will become the truth. Today, we're able to see the alarming statistics of this false narrative that has become real life. While people of color make about 30% of those imprisoned, while people of color make about 30% of the United States population, they account for 60% of those imprisoned. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, 1 in 3 black men can expect to go to prison in their lifetime. 1 in 3 black men can expect to go to prison in their lifetime. I invite you to ask yourself what you envision as the modern criminal. If an African American male fits your generalization, I challenge you to consider the originality of that mindset. Being black and male is not a crime. It's a narrative that's been conditioned into us after years of political manipulation. It's a burden that the black population has to carry. But most importantly, it's a lie that can be untold. Like I said before, I'm a firm believer that no one is born with hatred in their hearts. Hatred, bias, prejudice, fear, all of those things are learned. They're not innate. We gather them from the society that we grow up in. If we're able to see a generational effort to redefine people of color, not by the color of their skin, but by their virtue, over time, we will be able to see change. In fact, we've already been able to see change. Prominent organizations from schools to the corporations to the military have made conscious efforts to diversify the workplace. Somebody can think of Martin Luther King Jr., Oprah Winfrey, and Barack Obama as role models just as easily as they would think of Winston Churchill, John F. Kennedy, or Bill Gates. And a child born today in a culture that thinks like this learns to view the world a little differently than the child born yesterday. A little less prejudice, a little less fear. Your thoughts and actions today depict what the world of tomorrow will look like. And I can't wait for the day that I can firmly say that the child born tomorrow will no longer associate blackness with criminality. Thank you.